What is up, internet? Welcome back to Milehighkei, America's smallest, pun intended, K-car channel. And today I'm back in my garage and I'm going to finish up the disassembly of the Honda E07A. So where we left off last time, I got the top end and all of the accessories removed from the block and the bottom oil pan cover. As we learned in the last video, there are some bolts here on the inside below the lower cover for the oil pan that actually hold the main oil pan in place. And the reason why it is on this box instead of on the engine stand is because this bolt right here, which I was using to hold the engine onto the engine stand, is actually part of the oil pan. So I wouldn't have been able to remove it on the stand anyways, and I took it off so I could put my other engine on there. So I've been doing a really terrible job of updating and filming, working on the Datsun. So right here, as I said, is the engine for the Datsun, which will be getting rebuilt soon. So this is a J13. It is the original engine that came in the truck in 1966. And since the last time I updated you, I have repainted all of the subframe, the steering, and then I assembled some of the new parts that I got. I got a new idler arm, some new tie rod ends, some new tie rods for each side, as well as new bushings for the sway bar, which are up here and over here. And then I painted some of the links red, as well as completing the driver's side, because on the last video I had only done the passenger side. So now I'm ready to start on the brake lines and then reassembling the engine over here and dropping it back in. I wanted to get it running by this summer, but I don't think that is going to happen. So I'll keep you posted on this, and there will actually be a video on that, doing the brake lines, very soon. But back to what you're probably here for, which is the disassembly of the E07A. Now we just have a bunch of 10mm bolts holding on the main part of the oil pan. So there are
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15,
and 16 10mm bolts holding the oil pan on. I'm going to start taking those off and see if we can't pop this thing off. Thanks for joining me, and let's get to it. Voila! That took a little longer than I thought, but I did get the main part of the oil pan off. Here is the dipstick tube, as well as the rest of it. It was just really stuck on there, and then this alignment pin right here, as you can see, has some corrosion on it, which was also making it stick, but I wiggled it off, and now you can see, I guess this would be the crankshaft cradle slash some of the baffling for the oil pan. I'm going to remove the oil pickup tube and store that separately from everything else, and then I'll start to take out all of these crank bolts. I got some stuff to take apart. I'm gonna get to it. Sweating, drink water, drink water, drink water. All right, the oil pickup tube is pretty self-explanatory to remove. There's just one 10mm bolt right here holding up the little bracket for the tube, and then the two 10s down here. Okay, so these crank bolts, there's 8 14mm bolts, and I saw somewhere that you're supposed to take off stuff in the reversed torquing order, then you put them on. So I'm gonna attempt to do that this time. Hopefully these aren't on here too tight. I'm gonna keep this all in one piece, and I will make note that this little diagonal part goes towards the rear of the engine, just so I don't get anything confused. But trying to keep this all in one. There's 4 seats for the crank. And now we'll get to removing all of the pistons. Okay, with this part of the process, I'm going to try to be hyper organized. I'm going to be taking off each cylinder in order and putting it into a bag and labeling it. I've turned the engine over to where the first cylinder is up at the top. Bolts on here are 12 mils. I'm going to break these off. Bearings have some wear on them, a little bit of scraping, but I'm going to be replacing all of this anyways, so that's just good for... Alright, so here is cylinder number 1's piston, and it's actually a little H-beam. Well, I guess I was expecting them to be this small. I'm going to put this back together, put it in a bag, and then label which way is the front of the engine, just for a little bit easier reassembly. And so after looking at the piston a little further, you can kind of see right here on the top of the piston, there's a little arrow, and that little arrow points towards the front of the engine, so I don't need to label that. And like I said, these videos are mostly for me to be able to reassemble the engine correctly after I get all new components. Alright, now that you've seen that done once, I'm just going to repeat the process for the other 2 cylinders and kind of speed it up so we can get to actually removing the crankshaft. Now that the pistons are out, it's a pretty straightforward shot to getting this completely torn down to the bare block. So this is the rear main seal cover, or whatever you want to call it. So it's just held on with these 4 10mm bolts. On the front main seal, there's actually 5 10mm bolts. So I'm gonna get these undone, and then the front one's on, and then we will lift the crankshaft out of the engine. So this was also siliconed on. I'm not sure if that's how it comes from the factory, but I would definitely be replacing the rear main seal and getting a full gasket kit for the engine when rebuild time comes. So now that the rear main seal is off, we can get the front main seal. So I stand corrected. This is not just the front main seal. This is actually the oil pump. So here is the oil pickup where the tube mounts, and it is held onto the crank. See the two flat sides right here? It holds itself onto the crank right here, and that is what actually pumps the oil. You learn something new every day. Now that nothing is holding in the crankshaft, it just lifts out, and then we are all done. We have a bare block. So what just fell down in there are one of the thrust washers. Gonna take those out and bag them up with some of the other bearings, and then I'm going to clean this off a little bit with some brake cleaner so I can store it a little easier, and then I can start gathering parts in order to rebuild it. Before we actually have the block broken down is this little cover. I already took some of the hoses that were attached to it off, and this is actually the crankcase vent port, I guess you would call it. So just gonna take out these 5 10mm bolts real quick. We got the engine broken down and stripped to its bare block and got all the parts organized, and all that there is left to do is the head, which I will do in another video because I feel like I should keep it separated like that. And before I go, I just have this. So that's going to be it for this video. I appreciate all of your support. Hopefully very soon we can get it up to 500 subscribers. I know that's not a lot, but you got to start somewhere. So the next project is going to be working on the Datsun's brake lines and reassembling the engine. I have a couple more things that I need to get before I can get going on that. In the meantime, I might be able to take apart the head on the E07A and then start to amass parts in order to rebuild it. Be sure to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time, and remember, keep it small.